Hello and good morning. We are live with Shree's Sunday New York Times Read Along. Our guest today is Rick Berke. We will be starting in just a minute. Please like, please comment, please share, and let us know where you're watching from. Good morning. This is Shree's Sunday New York Times. Our guest today is Rick Berke, former New York Times editor and reporter, former executive editor of Politico, and currently the executive editor of Stat, a news website focusing on health, medicine, and other research-related topics. Our host, of course, is Sri Srinivasan. We've been hosting the New York Times Read Along for 5 years. And of course, we'd like to wish everyone a happy Diwali. Please like, please comment, please share, please let us know where you're watching from. And we will bring on our host, Sri Srinivasan.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Greetings from Puerto Rico in San Juan. We're here with the family. Even the dog traveled during the pandemic, and we are now here. One of the things that's so nice about being here is obviously the beach and the weather, but one of the problems is that it's not easy to get the Sunday New York Times print edition in time for this show. So Neil is going to be doing a lot of the driving of the New York Times, and there you see the print paper laid out there. And good morning to you, Neil. Neil's our producer. He has been with us as we've been doing this for almost 3 years now, but overall the Times Read Along has been going for 5 years, a celebration of print, but also celebration of trustworthy news and information. And we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Please tag and share with your friends. Please hit retweet. Please comment. We're live on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and on YouTube right now. Carla's watching from New Jersey. Carla is former longtime copy chief, national copy chief of the New York Times. Who else is here? Jonathan Borstein's watching from the East Village. Hi, Jonathan. Rosanna Bernstein's watching from Miami Beach. Welcome, Rosanna. Susan's watching from Stuytown in New York. Just great to have everyone here. Linda's watching from Long Island. How's your Sunday going? Stefan's watching from Ramsey, New Jersey. Happy Diwali. And Sudha is watching from Hastings-on-Hudson. Hi, Auntie, and happy Diwali. That's Neil's mom, a dedicated viewer of this show. Let's see, Patty's watching from New York. She usually watches on LinkedIn as well as on Facebook, and you can share this on multiple platforms so your friends can join us. They can watch live or later. Nicole is watching from Goa. Hello and happy Diwali. And let's see. So
what a great audience we have from Russia today.
Maria is watching from Russia. We don't often get someone from Russia watching. Russia, part of my childhood home, one of my childhood homes. I lived there after I was born in Tokyo and lived in Bhutan and then Moscow, and then got to live in the United States. Doug is watching from San Francisco.
One of our early risers.
Doug, you're amazing. Doug's a former guest on this show. Just great to have folks from all over. Gwen's watching from Long Island. Welcome. And it's great to have folks here.
Shri, the power of our show. We haven't even brought on Rick Berke yet, who is the executive editor of Stat, and we've already gotten a subscriber. That's not bad.
Welcome, Naomi, and congrats on signing up for Stat. Amazing news service, as you are about to hear. Kimberly's watching from Berlin. Thank you so much. Chris Ann is watching from Brisbane, Australia. Welcome, Diana from Michigan. Folks, tell us how your Sunday is going, what you're thinking about with the news, everything going on in the news. Of course, Natalia is watching from the Ukraine, the pandemic, the economic struggles, the Proud Boys, domestic terrorists roaming Washington, D.C. yesterday. Sujana is watching. Sujana Chandrasekhar is the host of another show that we work on at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. It's called She's on Call. Two surgeons, Sujana and Dr. Marina Korean, will be hosting that. And today they have a terrific show about various, they're talking to two gastroenterologists. So join us at 11 a.m. Eastern, and they'll talk a lot about COVID as well. So great to see this amazing lineup. Welcome, everybody. If you're new to us here, we're reading the print edition of the New York Times and talking to Rick Berke. And so, Neil, let's thank our team, and then let's get started.
Absolutely. We couldn't put on this show without a great team. Paula Kiger at Big Green Pen, Steve Taylor at Steve DeReeve, Julia L. Weeks, and Carla Baranauckas at Kabara. One of the things that's different about the shows that we do is that we have staff in Facebook and in LinkedIn engaging with the audience, sharing links, answering questions, pointing people, adding context to the discussion. Too many brands just set up a live stream and point the camera, and there's a great panel discussion, but no one to add links and answer questions. So thank you for making the New York Times read-along experience so rich for our viewers, Paula, Steve, Julia, and Carla.
Look at this great comment from Alexandra. How cool. I had no idea about the show. Well, welcome. We do this every Sunday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern, but of course it's recorded, so you can watch it on all the platforms later as well. And we'd like to thank our sponsors, and then we're going to meet Rick Berke.
Absolutely. And one of the things I want to mention is that we are live on, in addition to Shri's Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube, also on Stats channels on Facebook and Twitter. So welcome to everyone joining us. You'll be hearing from Rick Berke, executive editor, fairly soon. So as far as our sponsors are concerned, Shri, let's please tell folks about Muckrack.
We are delighted to partner with Muckrack on various projects, including their Muckrack Live series. But here we want to tell you about Muckrack Academy and the free certification course that I put together with them. It's Fundamentals of Social Media, and anyone can enroll. It's about 2 hours of work, and you can do the work in 2 hours, 2 days, or 2 months. It's Muckrack Fundamentals of Social Media course, and these are all people with their certificates, including someone who printed it out, which is really neat that they did that.
What a concept, printing it out. We'd also like to recognize Strategy Focus Group. In addition to Muckrack, Strategy Focus Group is a global team of human capital strategists committed to helping organizations solve people issues within your organization. They do that by working alongside you to solve your toughest problems and helping you capture your greatest opportunities. Thank you to both Muckrack and Strategy Focus Group for your support of the New York Times Read Along. If you're interested in sponsoring the show, please reach out to either Shri or myself. You can reach Shri at digimentors.group, or myself, Neil Parekh. I'm the executive producer for the New York Times Read Along and occasional guest host. My email address is neil@digimentors.group. And we'd also encourage you to learn more about our sponsors. You can go to readalong.link/muckrack or readalong.link/strategy focus group to learn more about the great work that they do. So with that, Shri.
Well, one thing before
please.
we do, I want to just acknowledge that today is the 250th episode day for the other program that we do, the daily COVID-19 show. We've had more than 450 guests on that show. We've had the chief scientist of the World Health Organization, and we are marking the 250th episode at 9 p.m. Eastern tonight. Would love for all of you to join us. And then we're going to transition from a daily show for 250 days to once or twice a week. So watch for that. But tonight we have two great guests. Sunny Slaughter is with us, executive consultant, expert on diversity and inclusion. And we're also joined by Dr. Peter Hotez, who's vaccine scientist and the author of Preventing the Next Pandemic. Please connect with both of them, and please join us 9 p.m. Eastern. And now let's meet our guest for today.
Absolutely. Our guest today, again, for people who may just be joining us, is Rick Berke, executive editor of STAT, a news website about health, medicine, and more, particularly research. And Rick is a longtime political editor and reporter at the New York Times and former executive editor of Politico. Rick, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here. You know, I love talking. Two of the things I love talking about are the New York Times and STAT. So you're not gonna be able to get me to shut up. But one thing I just have to say, and I have my New York Times mug here, coffee, so I'm all set to go.
Let's show that again, Rick.
Yeah, I have a whole
collection
of New York Times swag. So the other thing I wanted to mention is I cannot believe Shri is dangling this San Juan thing in our faces. Here I'm freezing in Boston in the winter morning, and here you are. Oh, I have the beach, but I can't get the New York Times print. Give me a break. That's really not fair.
Not only is he holding that in front of us, Rick, but he's also, I'm going to have to show the paper here. You should see the setup. I had to move my entire office into the dining room.
He's making you do all the work.
As usual.
Yeah.
But I will say, before we, all kidding aside, we're celebrating 5 years of the New York Times read-along, and it's an homage to print, homage to the New York Times. We can criticize it as good as anyone. We obviously have our opinions about the paper, but I want to acknowledge the community that Shri has built up over the last 5 years. You can see the audience that we attract, a loyal following. Audience doubles over the course of the week watching the recording. So Shri, thank you so much for everything that you've done and for trusting your show in our hands, for me, with Paula, with Steve, etc. So let's dig into the paper. But before that, Shri, I'll let you start with Rick in terms of a couple of questions.
Sure. Thank you very much, Neil, and to the entire team. We're so lucky to have this great way to talk about the news, and that's really what we're doing, but we're using it through the lens of the print New York Times. Let's talk a little bit about STAT News. STAT, tell us about the site. We'll show the website also to folks, and then Rick, we want to dig into some of the great work you've been doing there, but let's first talk about STAT.
Well, great. Well, again, thanks for having me, Shri. It's great to meet your team and to be reunited with Carla again, who's just was a wonderful colleague for so many years. So basically what STAT is I was, just as a little background, I was at the New York Times for about 28 years doing all kinds of things. And then, as you mentioned, went to Politico, which was a totally different all digital operation where I had a sort of deep dive into a place that could not be more different than the Times. And then I went about to start STAT, which is owned by John Henry, who's the owner of the Red Sox and the Liverpool soccer team. And he had bought the Boston Globe and decided that Boston is such the epicenter of health and medicine that we need a publication that covers these stories that aren't being covered. And it's bigger than the Boston Globe, a great regional paper, but he said it's an international story. I want a publication that's beyond Boston, and that has people around the world covering health, medicine, life sciences. So I came on board. It'll be 5.5, 6 years now. We launched our 5th birthday from launching was a week ago, and so our birthday's about the same timing as the read along. You know, our history. We could have had joint birthdays. And what we did was we tried to. We saw a vacuum, that there was no publication. There were a lot of health publications. There were a lot of academic and trade publications, health policy publications, but nothing whose sole focus was in a provocative, aggressive way covering science, medicine, and health. And all the stories out there that are really head turning and important and touch all our lives. And we also wanted to be a watchdog on a lot of these institutions and companies selling cancer cures and things like that without really any kind of, which was sort of all hype and all hat and no cattle, really. So we started that 5 years ago, and it's really taken off ever since. I mean, we hired the best experts in the field, well-known journalists, seasoned journalists, as well as the best people I could find coming out of school. So we wanted to make sure we had a really authoritative team immediately. And so we established ourselves pretty quickly. And we've been around for 5 years. We've become, in many ways, the go-to place on drug development, research, drug discovery, things like CRISPR gene editing innovations, health tech. We also have a first opinion section where we've printed more than 2,000 first person and opinion pieces. And it's become a real forum with like important, influential people weighing in on a lot of questions of the day. And then when COVID came along, that sort of was an inflection point for us because we were already fairly well established, but our audience grew, immediately, like 5 times what it was. Our reporter Helen Branswell is, I'm sort of biased, but I will say she is the most respected infectious disease reporter anywhere in any publication. And she was out there January 4th writing about this mysterious potential coronavirus coming in from China. And she has never let up ever since, nor has Stat let up ever since. And one thing we've brought to the table right away is that our reporters have been covering all the things you're reading about now about vaccines and drug development and so forth. These are hard, complicated stories to understand and write about. You can't just throw a reporter on sort of how is Pfizer developing this drug. You have to know this inside out. I certainly have learned, since that's not my background, I certainly have even more admiration for the reporters who understand these issues. But this was something that was right in our wheelhouse for years. So when COVID came along, we were really well positioned to be a trusted source on these stories.
It's so great to hear about the work of Stat. Maybe we can just look at the front page of Stat and you can tell us some of the stories and what are the things that you've been covering in a way that might be different from the Times and other places.
First of all, I would say, the coverage of COVID in the Times has been really spectacular, and I'm so proud of all my former colleagues at the Times, and I'll always be such a cheerleader for what the Times does. We can't approach the sort of resources of what the Times can do with having people around the world covering COVID. But what we can do is we can zig where the Times is zagging. I mean, I know from my years at the Times what the Times is good at. And what I do as editor of stat is look for ways in that I know the Times isn't going to do, where we can leverage our expertise, which means we don't have a whole bunch of people to throw on the White House to write an amazing, great story inside the White House about how it's handling COVID, for example. But what we do have is we have people like Helen and Sharon Bagley and other people who know infectious disease, who know science better than anyone. And so they can write with authority about and see around corners. And our whole team is like that. We can find stories that no one else is doing. We've broken several of the stories about vaccine development. We've broken, we were again there very early writing exhaustively, extensively in January about COVID. And I see on the screen our COVID tracker, which is just a very user-friendly way of looking at county by county, the COVID spread around the United States. We also have country by country breakdowns. We also have, the tracker also includes cases over various time periods. And we also have a tracker of that it shows preparedness of various counties around the country. So it's a very, I think, very accessible, up-to-date tracker. We also have a vaccine and drug tracker that takes advantage of our own expertise about what are the vaccines and drugs in development that you should pay attention to. And again, it's always leveraging on our expertise. I mean, we have a weekly podcast called Read Out Loud, which every Thursday, where you see our three hosts talk in a very engaging but really knowledgeable way about the latest trends and what's happening with these companies and developing drugs. And it's especially with what we all are facing in the world right now. It's so, I think what we do and what they do and their expertise is just, I think, I hope an important contribution to the public's knowledge and understanding of what we're all going through with COVID. The other thing I just want to say is we've also been deeply concerned about wanting to cover the patient stories, how people are affected by COVID. I think something that all of us as journalists have to watch is that this is we're on a war footing. This is getting worse every day, and I worry at stat. I'm always looking for ways to sort of remind readers that people are dying every day, and you can sort of get numb to that. But people are dying every day, and we're trying to capture that in our coverage, in our narratives, in our multimedia. And it's also important to us that we cover the vulnerable communities and the huge disparities in who's getting treatment. And I think we're going to see that, especially with vaccine distribution. We now have created a beat specifically on the intersection of race and life sciences, and and the reporter on that beat is Nick St. Fleur, who was a former New York Times science reporter, and he is doing this under the auspices of the Knight Wallace Fellowship, and he just had a piece last week about issues related to race and vaccine hesitancy, and these issues are obviously really important and ones that we're going to be watched very closely. Now, if you can go back to, you had asked about the homepage. Can you go back for 1 second?
Sure, absolutely. There
You
you
see
go.
in the upper left-hand corner where it says 30 turning points. That's a piece we published in October, looking through next year to try to chart where the pandemic would go and sort of absolute turning points. And you can jump around in sort of a very user-friendly way and jump ahead to Christmas and to next spring and to the inauguration. And that was our way of trying to give people a sense of how this might play out. Because I think something we're all facing is, when is this going to be over? How are we going to get through these next months? There's no end in sight. And what we tried to do with this piece is to give people a little bit of a roadmap as best we could about what may lie ahead.
That's great. That's really good. I wanted to and make sure that folks see some of the comments that have come in over the last part of the discussion. Going back to a comment from Doug Levy praising that reporter Branson, I think it was.
Helen Branswell.
Helen Branson. Well, you're saying it's a fabulous model of journalism in the current era. So Sri, I'll look for some of these comments as you continue the conversation.
Sure. Yeah, here's Doug's comment about Branswell is absolutely tops on infectious disease. I've admired her work for many years. She's the authority. So it's great that you were able to get her. Pavan, who's been a guest on the show, says great hearing how stat works in a news ecosystem with the Times, and lots of other comments here. Paula says, yes, the patient story angle is so important. Miriam Berkeley says, I'm watching this on YouTube on my television, but I wanted to comment that I never heard of STAT, and I'm glad you have Rick Berke on to talk about it. Just signed up for the newsletter, so you're reaching new folks. But this must be one of the frustrating things where you have, one of the most useful and helpful sources of information at the moment about the biggest story in the world, and you have to do the marketing to get it out there. So talk a little bit about what are some of the efforts you're making around that.
Well, now that Miriam has signed up, I can just go home now. I'm done. So no, it's very interesting. It's interesting to hear people that don't know about STAT, because I, of course, have been living this for years, so I know about STAT, and it was interesting to me from the very beginning. We would have to explain to people what STAT was, but from the very beginning, I'd go to like a science conference or health, whatever, and people you'd say you're from STAT, and they'd either say they've never heard of us or that they love STAT. And it's really interesting, and something I never anticipated, Sri, but there's a passion for those who know STAT. There's a passion for what we do. And I've seen in the years since people come up, you work for STAT? I mean, there really is a passion that I can't really, people really who like this stuff really go to us. And so it hasn't been as hard to get we don't run into as many people as Miriam. More and more people know about what we do. And we've certainly we're doing our second big STAT summit, annual summit next week. And Tuesday, I'm interviewing Bill Gates. We're interviewing Tony Fauci, all the top CEOs of all the companies developing vaccines, Jennifer Doudna, who just won a Nobel Prize. So we've been getting big, we've interviewed Bill Gates like 4 times since STAT began. We interviewed Vice President Biden when he was still vice president. STAT was just beginning. So we haven't had trouble attracting an audience right away, or sort of getting credibility from people who are sort of important players in this space. So and we've done some reader surveys, and just by looking at our own sort of subscription rates, our subscription rates are of renewals of people buying our we have free stories, and then about half our site is Stat Plus, which is you have to pay for. Our renewal rate for Stat Plus is about 95%, which is unheard of in media. It's like, and this is not just individual subscribers, but we have big group licenses. People just keep coming back. And I think with COVID, even though we cover much more than COVID, that has raised our profile significantly in a way that, as I said, we probably have 5 or 6 times the audience that we did a year ago, and that's not going away.
Wow, that's amazing. One thing that I do want to ask before we get to looking at the paper is, what do you think that you're doing differently from legacy science publications? You found this spot, but science is so important, medicine is so important. Why wasn't there somebody doing what you're doing in terms of the tech, the graphics, the visuals? What were you able to identify as a missing opportunity for folks?
I think one of the joys of starting your own news organization is you're not beholden to any past ways of doing things. So every person we've hired at Stat, we have 50 some people, has been hired by myself or my partner Angus McCauley, our Chief Revenue Officer. So, and we've put a premium on people who are obviously talented and smart, but also creative and collaborative. I have turned down a lot of people who are great journalists, but just people you wouldn't want to work with, because it's very important to us to work as a cohesive team. And I think having a really good team where people are working really hard and doing their best work and working collaboratively really makes a difference. And when we don't have to worry about print or any legacy restrictions, if we have a good story, we just publish it right away. We don't have a whole huge bureaucracy or infrastructure of editors or whatever. We can move really fast. And one of my fears was at the beginning was I want us to be provocative and interesting and newsy and have news energy, but I also don't. But this is complicated stuff. I don't want us to make mistakes. This is sensitive stuff. And that was my big fear, that like, what if in our rush to be newsy, we risk our credibility. But knock on wood, we have yet to have one story ever of our thousands and thousands of stories that we've published where anyone has questioned anything we've written of the science. I mean, we have corrections here and there about something we got wrong, but in terms of the overall credibility of our sourcing and who we deal with, we've had sort of a stellar record, and I'm most proud of that. And let me just say one thing before we go to the Times. I have a lot to say about the Times too, but one of the readers mentioned Helen Branswell, and I just want to go back and show you one or two stories she did that will show you the kind of journalism that we do that you can't get anywhere else. And there's this, if you could flash on the screen, I had two stories that I wanted to show of Helen's. If you have.
Sure, we'll just put that up right now. I will bring up the front.
One of them.
Everyone, please look for, while we're setting that up, everyone, please follow Rick Berke on Twitter. He's at RICKBERKE, and follow Stat as well on all the social platforms. And so we're going to, here we go. You can see.
Okay.
So where should we go?
This story where it says winter is coming, why America's window of opportunity to beat COVID-19 is closing. That story was published August 10th. And that was the first story anywhere that authoritatively warned the world that, wait a minute, this is going to get really bad, but we still have a chance to save ourselves if we take these steps. And this was based not just on Helen's authority, but on her talking with credible leading health, public health experts. And that story got a ton of attention at the time in August. And how many stories have you seen since then? Dozens of stories on TV and radio and newspapers about winter and how bad winter is and all this stuff. Helen was the first person to identify this, which seems obvious, but it wasn't at the time. And that's an example of the kind of story where we're ahead of the curve. And if you look at stats reporting from the very beginning of this, it can provide a roadmap of where this was going. There's another story we have from July 14th, which in the same vein was also by Helen, that warned everyone how to fix the COVID-19 dumpster fire in the U.S. That was July 14th. These are stories that if you look back and you read stat, you knew everything that was coming, you knew how bad this could get, and you knew what we could have done to stop it. And let me also just say and it's not just, I don't mean to say, Helen's our lead reporter on this, but we have many, many reporters who are expert in covering all this. So I don't want to leave them out, but I do want to mention one other moment that I think was a signal moment in the coverage of the pandemic, which was in February, Helen moderated a panel on COVID with Ron Klain, the incoming White House Chief of Staff now, and Tony Fauci. And you can read the coverage of this, an excerpt of this in Bob Woodward's new book. But Helen was asking them about this virus from China, and Fauci said, I don't know if we should be that concerned about it. And Helen just stopped the thing and said, are you telling me that I'm concerned? She essentially said, I'm concerned about this virus. Why aren't you, Tony Fauci? And I think it's a prime example of a reporter doing her job, who saw, because of her background in covering SARS and swine flu and all this, she understands public health, and she saw this coming, and she had a panel of leading public health authorities, but she, the reporter, was the one holding their feet to the fire on this. And of course, Tony Fauci, I don't say this at all that to diminish Tony Fauci. He is an amazing, credible, he's for good reason, he's the most authoritative public health official in the world. And that's why we talk to him as much as we can, why we're having him at our event on Tuesday. But I just want to point out that our role as journalists is to hold even the Tony Fauci's accountable and to ask the tough questions. And again, that's what I'm most proud of at STAT, that we've done from the very beginning and will continue to do.
That's excellent. I'm just showing everybody Helen's Twitter feed here, senior writer, infectious diseases at Stat News, and conspiracy theory free zone. She blocks rude people and racists, I guess, and please consider Googling first. This is one of the things that, of course, is so important. Before you ask dumb questions, make sure you Google. So everyone, please follow her and follow at Stat News. We want to show a couple of the messages that have come in. Here's a note from Pradnya Haldipur, former guest on the show. Having spent many years fundraising in academic medicine, I wish Stat had been around for far longer than 5 years. Tagging everyone I can think of who should know about Stat, and she wasn't kidding. This is what she's been doing, tagging folks so that they can see this. So everyone, please do the same. Tag your friends who should know about Stat, who should listen to this conversation, meet Rick, and understand on Tuesday he and his team are hosting this big event, and they're going to be talking to, among other people, Dr. Fauci. And one of the things that I think everyone has learned is that the way science works is that it evolves and people make mistakes. You remember that in the early part of this, Fauci and others were not so sure about masks. They said that, the way you use them might make it worse because you'll touch them and futz with them and things like that. And now, of course, that has changed as well. There was a beautiful comment.
Another comment, is from Dr.
Yeah, this
Mona.
is a great comment here. So glad I logged in. This is astounding. I've already sent the link to my researcher scientist son, who's a virologist. So,
And I wanted to note it was Dr. Mona Shah watching on LinkedIn. Sorry that your name and face did not come through, but I did want to acknowledge her.
thank you. That's awesome that she did. And here's Pradnya still tagging people, and everybody, please do the same. And she's continuing to do that. And Rick is asking, where is the link to the event? Is that sold out? Is it closed? What is the story?
Oh no, we are still. In fact, I'm sending a letter tomorrow morning to all our readers that you can still sign up for the event. The event starts at 1 o'clock on Monday, and it goes every afternoon through Thursday, and the the big and to be fair about it, it's $300 for the 4 days. And it's $600 if you want special access to the speakers. But we're getting a torrent of interest in this event, and it's not too late. I would just look. I think you can look. Just look Stat Summit 2020. I think you can. That's probably a way to call up, and you can look at the list of participants, and it's really. I don't think I'm exaggerating to say it's probably the in terms of the marquee names in health and science in the world right now. This is it. Again, we have CEOs of that was last year's summit. We have CEOs of all the major drug companies. We have Bill Gates, Fauci. We have Chelsea Clinton talking about vaccine denial, which something she's worked on herself. We have feature all our Helen and a bunch of other stat reporters talking about doing a lot of these interviews. And yeah, you can see the list of all these speakers. And we also have, we do something every year called Stat Wonderkins, where we identify about 30 of the sharpest up and coming young scientists in the country who are doing really cool things in science, and we're announcing them at the summit tomorrow. So you're going to see some younger faces and just a real mix of people, experience level, but everyone there was just carefully selected, and it's just a really a great mix. We've gotten such a great. We had a health tech summit a couple months ago. We've gotten such great feedback from our summits that we're having. We haven't announced this yet, so I'll announce it here. We're having 3 summits next year because it's really a way to bring our journalism to a live audience. Obviously, we've had to refashion things with COVID, but it's really we're really attracting a lot of interest. And also because it's not, we try to make the most out of our limitations because it's not in a physical space. More people are signing up to attend than we normally would have had.
Incredible lineup. I'm just looking, I recognize so many of the names, and then names I don't know because I'm not in that world, but you can tell from their titles that they're doing amazing work. I see I think the first woman to run a major pharma company is there, Dr. Fauci, Bill Gates. What a great group of folks. So everyone, please check out Stat Summit 2020. And it is true that in a world where everything seems to be, a free webinar every day, that when you are putting together something of this quality, it is worth paying for. So we certainly encourage everybody to sign up and pay to support great journalism. That's also what you're doing, right? This is the proceeds from this obviously support the work of Stat, and that's important. So
right, everything all the revenue we're getting for all that we do, we're pouring back into our journalism. And my plan and my goal is to grow Stat and make it even more of a sort of international force. We have a reporter now in Hong Kong, but we have huge ambitions to continue to grow the franchise.
Excellent. All right, we haven't even looked at the front page of the Times yet, so let's do that. It's been such a great conversation already. I know people are learning so much. Let's take a look. Neil's going to help us with the paper today, and we're going to just look at the front page and see what are the lead stories there. The first story is, of course, about COVID-19. One of the observations I made, Rick, is that the word Trump is not in a headline in any of the stories on the front page, probably the first time in a few days or a few months, maybe even. But talk about these stories and where you see us. One of the things you said is there's no end in sight. Where do you think this vaccine fits into our getting to an end?
Well, it's sort of a very tough, bad situation, and if you looked at that White House, that bizarre White House sort of press conference, I think a couple of days ago, where there were no questions, so it wasn't really a press conference, where you had the president and the Warp Speed folks say, this is great news. The vice president saying it's all, we have a vaccine and so forth. But you had no mention or reference that, more than 1,000 people in this country a day are dying. And this is getting worse in every state. And we're in an alarming situation. And it's all the more complicated by the fact that there is this rocky transition, and I think by the time Biden becomes president, no matter how well or not well the transition goes, a lot more people are going to be dead, and there's confusion at the top of the federal government right now. So the initial issue, obviously, facing this country and facing many countries is, how do we get this under control? With, as Helen wrote in July, winter was coming, winter is here, and Thanksgiving is here, and we have all these. How do we get the message out to people to take this seriously, which we still see a lot of people aren't? So there's the initial issue of spreading the disease. There is hope around the corner. I mean, the Pfizer vaccine news was really encouraging. There's a lot we still don't know. We don't know how much it will prevent, if you have a severe case, how much that will help. We don't know. There are a lot of questions about how this will play out, but the early signs are good, and the early signs for Pfizer are also good for Moderna and the other companies that have vaccines underway. So the drug development is sort of it's an amazing thing. Never before in science has anything moved this fast. So that's amazing. But what does that do for people right now who are sick or don't have jobs, who might not have access to a vaccine for months and months and months and months? Where does that leave these people? So we're in a warlike, bad situation. I wish I had the answers. I wish we could sort of go back to where we were when Helen wrote that July 14th story or August 10th story and said, winter is coming. We still have time to get a handle on this if we do X, Y, and Z. Well, we didn't do X, Y, and Z. And now how do you turn back? I don't know. And that's something that we're all gonna be facing. Again, there's positive news on the vaccine, but again, that's gonna take time. And even in the rosiest scenarios with the vaccine, there are huge distribution questions about how do you distribute, who gets it first, how does a million questions that we've never had to deal with on this scale. So so I wish I could say, we did that thing, as I said, to try to show where the country could be through the end of next year, to give you a sense of some of the milestones ahead. But the reality is the only thing I can say with surety right now is it's getting worse. And
Shri, I want to read the subheads. You can read the headline clearly. Deaths climb fast as hurdles loom for vaccine plans. But the two columns underneath, one, states aren't ready to distribute shots, and the other one, horrifying toll seen in coming months. The display picture, which again is also related, it's a shot from El Paso, a patient arriving at an emergency room, and sorry, obviously with the sun, I'll move the paper a little bit. A patient arriving at an emergency room in El Paso, where hospitals are straining as the number of COVID-19 cases keep jumping. It's that capacity issue that we saw in the spring is becoming an issue once again. And if you've seen some of those charts, this third wave is almost 3 times as high as the previous peaks in terms of cases.
Yep. And here's Laura Silverman saying a lot more people are going to be dead, quoting you. I will never understand where the outrage has disappeared to, which is certainly one of the issues. Carla asks a question, was bringing back sports, especially things like college football, a bad idea regarding COVID-19 spread, Rick?
I think anything where masses of people are together was probably a bad idea. I don't know if I want to single out sports specifically, but look at the numbers. Yeah,
and that's one of the things that we are going to look back when history looks back at this moment. What are some of the decisions we made? But when you said that we didn't do X, Y, and Z, we barely did X, right? Like that's
right.
Part of the problem, and that's one thing I should point out, that we're not going to show it, but we have trolls here among us, including someone who has said this is all lies that we're talking about. So it shows you that even as people die, people think that they're lies. And this is how 71 million people vote for a president who promised us this would disappear by Easter. Now, even Easter 2021 is so unlikely that this will disappear, and so scary. Here's the cover. Let's take a look at this. This is the Sunday Review cover, and this is Alfred E. Newman as Donald Trump, or vice versa. What me worry. And can I ask you, Rick, in terms of this is a Michelle Goldberg piece, the hard line that you have between opinion and news, straight news stories in a place like the Times has been blurred by things like analysis, news analysis as they call it, and also reporters writing in Sunday Review. How do you handle it at the paper, where Helen is actually, just that headline, "The winter is coming," is taking a kind of editorial stand, a worthy editorial stand, but in the old days there would have been a kind of, both sides and whataboutisms and all of that. So can you talk about that and how you would handle it as we look at the Times opinion section, and maybe Neil can kind of flip through it as you're talking?
Yeah, I would say there was a dramatic shift in my years at the time. When I started as a reporter at the time, we would very clearly write like what was it, a news story or a news analysis or a political memo that was a little more featurey and analytical. And then as a reporter and as an editor, there was more and more, certainly we were all pushing for, wait a minute, the world has changed and we need to write with more authority. And suddenly stories that may have been seen as opiniony were news stories. And there was no one wanted to read, if I was covering the even sort of historic moments, President so-and-so, nominated at convention, or so-and-so nominated at the convention. When I first would write those in '96, I might have been more of a straight lead for the history books. But then by the time I was doing that in 2000, it was a little more analytical, even in the lead of these historic stories, and a little more analysis and perspective in the top paragraphs. So I think we've seen the New York Times and journalism move in that direction. And when Helen writes about winter is coming, that's a point of view, but I see that as authoritative. I don't see that as, oh, that's just her viewpoint. That's that's the reality based on her decades of covering this. And she's quoting, and very carefully from the top, quoting experts in the field. And so it's not like her just sort of giving her take, but and for the very focused opinion-y pieces, that's where we have the first opinion section, where we run a lot of those all the time. And I think if you look at our first opinions and you look at our news stories, I think you would see a difference. I think with the Week in Review, I think it's sort of the same thing. It's not always a clear-cut, stark line, but sure. In the early days, the Week in Review used to be the province of reporters at the Times, and I used to write for the Review all the time, and that was an opportunity to be a little more analytical and a little more step away a little more from the straight news. When it was taken over by the opinion section, it became much more opinion-y, and sort of took it to the next step. But I think if you read the Times op-ed and Sunday Review, I do, versus the front page and the news sections, I think you can tell. I can pick out what's new, what's more news, and what's more opinion. But I do think there's certainly, it's not clear cut in the way it was years ago, and I think that's okay.
Sure.
I think there was a false, like, forced way of, like, on the, as you said, Shri, on the one hand this, on the one hand that, and that doesn't really serve anyone right now. You have to come in and the best reporters are the ones who are confident, who are doing their homework and doing their reporting, but are confident in what they write and can call things like they are based on their authority.
I think you're absolutely right. Friedel's watching from The Hague in the Netherlands. Welcome. And Debbie says, we need better graphics, not bar graphs, but 3 to 4 airplanes falling from the sky each day. Deaths. That's what she's saying would get people's attention. How do you feel about that?
Deborah, that's so funny, because I was just assembled some of my editors on Friday, and I said, we have this dashboard that we showed you of COVID cases and the escalation, but I said it's not enough. Somehow we're not capturing this, and I think you're absolutely right. We all need to do better. I think I'm particularly counting on the Times to do even more, because the Times is unmatched, unparalleled in what the Times does graphically and has been able to do with COVID. But I would give that challenge to the Times amazing graphics people. I mean, we are upping our game in that area, and it's so important. But we don't have the bandwidth.
Here's an amazing op-ed piece that you may have seen. It made its rounds on the internet in advance. The coronavirus saved my life. If I hadn't gone in for a coronavirus test, I wouldn't have learned I had lung cancer. So that's an unusual story. Let's see this. Let's see. Renee Edelman says, Sri, it's good to see you this morning interviewing Rick Berke. And I see Therese Steiner, who's been a guest on the show and is a good friend, says bonjour from Redondo Beach in California.
All these people at the beach, like that's really no fair.
Yeah, for those of you who missed it, Rick was not happy that I rubbed it in that I'm in right now in San Juan, Puerto Rico. I'll just show, to make it even worse, I'll just show my newsletter this morning. For those of you who haven't subscribed, hope you will. This is our dog in San Juan, kind of relaxing with a rainbow there. You see her, and this was my newsletter talking about what a normal return to normal means. And I'd encourage all of you, if you haven't subscribed, it's substack.com, srinet.substack.com. Hope you will sign up and hope you will read it. If it's already in your inbox, I hope you will open it and take a look. So thank you very much. If you've just joined us, we're interviewing Rick Berke on the New York Times Sunday Read Along, where we talk to interesting folks and read the paper together. Neil is showing us the newspaper. If we can get a wide shot, Neil, of all the sections, I want to ask Rick, were you surprised that all of this still exists when you left the Times? Did you expect it to be as robust as it is now? As you know, even the president of the New York Times at one point said that the paper, had predicted when the print edition would stop in less than 5 years now. What do you think about all of that as you see that laid out there? And I'm sure you see the print section yourself.
I think I'm not surprised. I'm pleased that there is still such a robust paper for people who grew up reading the Sunday New York Times, and it's a ritual of American life. It's one that I've tried to move away from because I want to be all digital as much as I can, but I don't deny that there's a certain comfort in sometimes taking that Sunday New York Times and all those really cool sections. I do think, though, that we're seeing the robustness of those sections doesn't surprise me, or the content. And I think the Times is only getting better and more ambitious. But I think in the future, the way of the vehicle by which you read those stories will change. I don't think you're going to see huge growth in print sections or anything like that, but I think you will see continued development and ambition for the content. But I don't think you're going to see like sections with more pages and more, than we're seeing now. I mean, again, I don't work there anymore, so I don't know, but I'd be surprised. We've seen a diminution over the years in terms of the actual print product. When I started there, if you look back at the old New York Times, it was a much wider, longer, the actual print paper was a bigger thing. And I remember they're cutting it back, and it's like, it seems so small, like a mini New York Times. And now it feels right to everyone, but it's a lot smaller right now than it was then. I also remember when we started color, everyone was saying color photos in the New York Times. You get settled on these traditions, and I think the important thing, whether it's print or online, the important thing is the content, and the Times is always going to be special and unmatched in the breadth and depth of its coverage.
No longer the old gray lady. And it did. I remember when they trimmed off. I don't know, Rick, if you know how much they trimmed, but the width of the paper they took off. Maybe a quarter inch. I'm not sure if it was even that much. Do you remember?
Yeah, I think it was at least that much, and it might have been even more than once. And I remember also. I remember all these milestones when there were proposals to have an ad on the front page, and the publisher said, we will never have an ad on the front page. And of course we did. The whole world changed for all of us,
Well, it's the reality, but let's also acknowledge the fact that the New York Times is not a failing newspaper, as a certain president likes to call it. It's been doing really well, particularly in the digital space. Right. They figured out how to make that work with not just the content and the paywall, which is difficult for some, but the special sections like cooking and the crossword and all of the New York Times universe of offerings. I mean, it is a successful model. I don't think anyone can deny that.
Yeah. It's just wonderful to see that people are paying for great journalism.
And
Absolutely.
They also have crossed 7 million subscribers. The goal they've given is 10 million subscribers as the universe. So this is also where when people might say, oh, well, the New York Times is a small, it's not everybody's going to be able to afford it, read it, etc. If you look at cable news, when you add up all the cable news channels, they don't add up to much more than that in terms of how much cable news is watched. So this is interesting. And so here's reinventing the paper every week, a story in the Times.
It's the Times Insider column, which is my favorite. It's about Amy Vershup, who was a guest on the New York Times read-along back in January. Really, to think about those days, I went up to New York. She hosted me at her house with Seb Modak, last year's 2019 52 Places Traveler. And we actually talked about the 2020 52 places to go, assuming that we would be traveling this year. No. And certainly they had to pivot, dropping the travel section, creating an at-home section. This article is about some of the games that they've played. They have origami instructions around the paper, and this week it's a game involving airport code. So just a question of showing how they've evolved and adapted. I know Shri always likes to show this day in history, so hopefully the focus is good. This is from when is this? November 15th, 1970. A dead whale. I remember seeing this on social media. A dead whale is dynamited. Can you just imagine this for a moment? This is off the coast of Oregon. A 45-foot whale carcass had washed ashore, and officials had to get rid of it. The 8-ton behemoth was simply too big to bury, so they opted instead to blow it up. They blew it up, which is just incredible to think about. This is 1970.
Can I just make a comment, Rick, about Neil's nails? They're pretty amazing. I've never had the chance to notice them before. But Neil, you got to tell us how
they're beautiful.
Maintaining such beautiful nails in the pandemic.
This is so Emily can paint them. This is what fathers and daughters have to do sometimes, Shri.
I love it. So your 7-year-old loves painting your nails, so you grow them out so beautifully.
She even said yesterday Go ahead.
No, I was saying when I show I have to I'm kind of ashamed of my nails, but yours, let's see them again. Come on, you got to show them to us now.
Shri, there's something called humor to mask shame. I don't know if you've heard of it. Of interest, the of interest section is always a guide to show what's in the paper. The Biden's German Shepherd will be the first shelter dog to take up residence in the White House. The keyboard mechanism of a grand piano is a complex system of interconnected parts with 36 adjustable components for each key mechanism. This is in the arts and leisure section. Have you heard of the language rot Welsh? Shri?
No.
No, it's in the book review, right there in the corner. If it's in focus, it's a mix of Yiddish, Hebrew, and repurposed German that developed in the High Middle Ages and spread across Europe among members of the itinerant underground. This is an interesting section when we do the read along. Again, the focus on what's in print. This is not in the print newspaper. This is something that is not in the online. This is exclusively in print. And we have the ad for Tiffany, Shri, in the top right corner. What did Stuart Elliott tell you about this ad?
He told us that this has run there since 1917. Tiffany's had a corner on A3. And Stuart Elliott, as Rick knows, his longtime colleague, he was the legendary advertising columnist at the New York Times. And we did this read along on one of the coldest days of the year. Neil and I were together at the restaurant in New York with Stuart, and it was like Boston-like weather. So that was I'll never forget it. But Stuart was fantastic. Let's just look at some of the comments coming in here. Stefan says, Rick, stat is what the world needs now, and we're grateful for what you and your expert team are producing. Thank you. And yes, everyone needs to be held accountable. And lots of other comments coming here from all over the world. We're just trying to keep up with it. And Ellen says, I thought color was making the New York Times rather cartoonish. And you remember those comments as well, Rick. And do you remember that first ad, I believe, was a Citibank ad on the bottom of A1, and people lost their minds when Times ran that.
It's great to see these international people tuning in. And by the way, our audience, just if you're curious, our audience for Stat is about a quarter international, and our biggest, it's all over, like our biggest audience is, I think, population area like California, New York. We have a big audience in Massachusetts since we're based here, but a big international audience.
Shri, this page, Tracking an Outbreak, is about staying apart but praying together. I just want to point out the photographs and text are by the great photographer James Estrin, featuring the Al-Dawah Mosque in Astoria on the top right. They added extra Friday prayers. St. Agatha's Church in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. That's the middle photo. The Manhattan Jewish Experience left gathering outside the Jewish Center right allows 60 people inside. The Christian Cultural Center, a predominantly Black megachurch in Brooklyn, has lost 19 members to COVID. And then a few other pictures. And at the bottom, I want to give a shout out, the Hindu Temple Society of North America allows 30 people to enter for 15 minutes at a time. Back in, I think it was April, Shri, we did 2 events with the Hindu Temple Society of North America. One was the 45th anniversary, and that was a very moving experience, just to be able to bring their work to a global audience, to people who would not be able to see it otherwise. But this is a great look at how religious institutions are adapting, but also some of the number of victims, the impact of COVID on their congregations.
Yeah, just really important to see how we can make sure that people are able to do things like sports or like religion, but how do they stay safe is going to be important. What is your relationship with advertising in Stat? I'm just looking at all the ads here. Do you do sponsorships or ads, or how do you try to do them?
We have sponsored content, and mostly in our newsletters, where it's clearly marked if it's like an item from a mini advertisement from a sponsor. And so we do have ads on the site. Most of our subscription business has overtaken our ad business, and they're all going up. They're all doing well, which we're very lucky in this day of media, because a lot of, as you know, the New York Times is doing great, but a lot of media organizations are sort of going through crises right now. We're gaining in every area, in events, in subscriptions, in advertising, but the our main revenue source right now is like the Times, is subscriptions, which is a very good place to be because it's a very stable, it's more stable than advertising. And also, frankly, we never worry about offending an advertiser, because if they want to pull an ad, which has happened to us before, then we're not beholden to anyone. And that's another beauty of the subscriber model.
Awesome. Stefan says, senior photographer James Estrin, founder of the legendary New York Times Lens blog, bring it back. Leader of the New York Times Portfolio Review, and much, much more. His old
friend is an old buddy of mine too, and he's just a really great guy, a great photographer.
Yeah, we should tweet at him and tell him we're talking about him right now. And Carla has a question for you. With all the work you did in political journalism, do you wish you had been covering the Trump administration, I guess, more directly in a political sense, or are you relieved you didn't have to deal with it on a daily basis over the last 4 years? Of course, this year you've had to a lot more.
Carla, that's a really good question, and it's really the answer is yes and no. I'm kind of torn about it. Like, I think I've covered so many. I covered Ronald Reagan for the New York Times. I mean, I filled in, and I wasn't like the full-time White House reporter, but I filled in for our White House reporters, and so I've had a real history of covering presidents in Washington and transitions. So part of me thinks, well, I know how to do this. Part of me, and another part of me thinks, oh my God, like that's the last thing I want to get tied up in. And the thing about Trump that I so admire for all the people at the Times and all the people who've been covering him, it's just so hard to gain traction because he is so much the story himself. And if you spend all this time doing a story that you think will move the needle, then he'll come in and do something else crazy and change the narrative. So it's very, I can't imagine how exhausting and challenging it must be to have been covering Trump. So part of me thinks, that's right up my alley. Another part of me thinks I'm so fortunate to have something that feels, in covering health and science, it's something that feels more real and more focused, and where we can focus on the science and the health and stories that really matter to everyone. So it's been, so I guess overall, I'd say I'm happy to have a lane of focus that I think where we can add value. Let me just say one thing about Times and covering transitions. And if you'll indulge me to go back to yesteryear a little bit, I was thinking about the first transition I covered for the New York Times, and that was the 92 Clinton transition. And I remember it just seemed so quaint to think back to what life was like then as a reporter at the New York Times, reporter anywhere. I remember a bunch of us were holed up at a hotel in Little Rock covering the Clinton transition. We were there for weeks on end, trying to get tidbits of what was happening with the Clinton transition. I remember particularly my colleague and I, the late, great Gwen Ifill, were having dinner with Warren Christopher, who was leading the Clinton transition team, and we were trying to get information out of him. And I remember we had a very civilized, nice dinner, took him to dinner, and he was very frustrating and not telling us anything. But we had a very civil, nice dinner to try to get information about what was happening with the transition. I remember I was so desperate for anything. I got the receipt and I wrote an item about I think I wrote an item about what Warren Christopher had for dinner with us, because that's the kind of tidbits you were looking for. But contrast that to now, when it was this situation where you wouldn't, reporters aren't based anywhere because of COVID, and the world has so changed that everything's moving so fast, and you wouldn't, can't see myself having a leisurely dinner with, Ron Klain, who's the incoming chief of staff, to talk about Biden and the transition right now, because partly because we can't have dinner because of COVID, but also partly because we're in the middle of this disastrous, difficult period right now. And I also remember, when I think about the quaintness of the time, I remember trooping. We had at the time the biggest White House team at the New York Times ever, and it was Tom Friedman, Maureen Dowd, Michael Kelly, Gwen Ifill, and myself. And we all trooped over to then Governor Clinton's mansion, which was just kind of little house in Little Rock, where we did an interview with him about the future of his incoming administration. a special New York Times exclusive, and we had our little cassette tapes, and then we all trooped back to the hotel and started quickly like transcribing the tapes. And when you think about that, it just seems like such a long time ago and such a different period in our history. And it's just, and anyway, I don't know why, but just thinking about the transition made me think back to those days at the time when before the world changed in so many different ways.
Look at this very striking ad here. It says it's been 72 years since 2020, and the best thing I remember is our family trip to Kissimmee, Florida. And this is a fun ad in the Times.
Shri, I actually was aghast when I saw the ad that they're promoting. This is from Kissimmee, Florida, the travel tourism bureau, that they actually think that people would take a trip as numbers are increasing.
That's true. Maybe they're promoting planning your next vacation, I guess. But I remember growing up, this is what Florida always did. In New York, they would run these local ads showing the winter scenes in New York and say, yeah, we've got it bad, we've got it good in Florida. Though I got to tell you, even someone I met who was in Miami a couple of weeks ago, even though Florida cases are spiking, they felt they were somehow safer than in New York. I want to ask Rick actually about Boston. I haven't heard that much about Boston and Massachusetts. You've got a Republican governor who does mostly the right thing.
Yeah, he's a Republican governor who did not vote for Trump, but he did not vote for Biden either. I don't think he voted for anyone on.
Was he the one who put his father's name? There was somebody who voted for his.
Yeah, I don't think he wrote in anything, but I could be wrong. The numbers are he's been a pretty responsible governor in handling all this. I don't know, but the numbers are getting bad again here, just like everywhere else. So,
by the way, he voted for Ronald Reagan. He wrote in Ronald Reagan.
Oh, he did? Okay. All right.
One thing I just want to note, Shri, flipping through the home section, it's interesting to notice how much white space they're using, how big the font is. It looks very different than the rest of the paper. Obviously, this is an ad, but it's just a very different design aesthetic than what we're used to seeing. As we approach 9:56 a.m. on the Sunday New York Times read-along.
It's great to see all of these sections here. What is the business cover story? Let's take a look. The Unraveling. And Capitalism is amazing, but it's also inadequate is another story in the business section. And Rick, you've seen what they've done with the photographs in the business section. They've really, like the color and all of that, they use it really well in the future. This is kind of a tamer version. Sometimes you've seen them really go with graphics and all of that in a big way. Can we see the Times Magazine, Neil, and what the cover is? Oh yeah, this is once again on Sunday Style, since you have it right there. Abby Phillips' story is she's next gen CNN, is something that she's been terrific on TV, talking about covering the election. So she's been. And
this article about Abby Phillip is by Katie Rossman, another former guest on the New York Times read along. You went to her place, I think about 2 years ago, Shri.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And she's just such a great writer. Katie finds the most unusual stories. So
I have a question about looking at this article is about Savannah Guthrie, praising her for her work in the debate. So these two articles about women in media in the style section, not in the news section, or not, say in business, in terms of business and media. Is that reflective of a larger issue in terms of women in media being covered in style versus being covered in business?
I would say I don't know. That's a fair point to raise. I can't imagine a piece. I don't know. That's a good question. Both those pieces are more sort of personality pieces than they are about like media pieces in a way. They feel like they have a more stylesy feel to them, which is more in the eye of the beholder. But you raise a fair question. Why isn't that a media piece, a business in the business section as a Monday business piece? Part of these things sometimes it's determined like who thought of the story. I mean, sometimes these things, it's not like some grand decider is saying we're going to do Savannah Guthrie and it should be Styles, or should it be business, or sometimes it's just who had the idea, who's the writer who did it. But again, I think both those pieces just have a fairly stylesy feel to them. I remember I wrote in one of the first pieces ever for Styles. I wrote a cover story on Cokie Roberts, who was then sort of the Savannah Guthrie of TV. And that was actually killed because there was a sense that it was too laudatory, which it really wasn't. But it shows you how the times have changed those days, where they didn't want a political reporter writing a story that was seen as positive about a TV journalist.
Interesting. And you're right, the content might be more for style.
Yeah, my critique here would be that why run these two stories like this next to each other? And one seems a lot old. The debate happened now 2 weeks. It's like older news, while Abby should have gotten the bigger treatment because she's now, they're both covering today's stories, but Abby's next gen, she should have gotten the bigger treatment. But I wouldn't have done both stories next to each other on one page as two separate stories anyway. You could have done like a roundup.
I have to say, just out of, and it's awful for people, especially former editors, to second guess, but since you did, I will too. In a perfect world, you wouldn't have those two stories on the cover. It's for what we call the mix of, you just want a different feel and a different kind of story. But a lot of things happen for different reasons and different and sort of, so I hate to second guess anyone, but even though I just did.
Sure.
In a perfect world, sure, you're right. There shouldn't be both those stories there.
And I will point, the picture in the bottom left corner is growing audience for political views. Hassan Piker won big on Twitch. So, there is that mix of three different, but you're right. Abby Phillip was election night versus the debate, which was several weeks ago.
I mean, another way to do it, frankly, maybe this is what they were trying to do here, is to package them together, and
maybe.
But if that was the intent, it doesn't look like it was packaged together. But sometimes there's a way, here two rising, start, there might have been ways to make it look like this was intentional. And again, I've probably stepped into it, so I probably have said more than I should.
All right, well, let's keep moving. I've been corrected on the pronunciation. It's Kasimi and not Kissimmee. So thank you for that, Naomi. And let's look at the Times Magazine. Neil, walk us through the cover a little bit, and then we've got some questions for Rick, and then we'll wrap up for the day.
And will we be showing the video today, Sri, or what do you think?
Yeah, let's go to the magazine. Let's talk about this, and then we can go.
Sure. So the cover is it's that the stamp is at the top. It says "Democracy by Mail, November 15, 20." See if we can get a closer look at that. A little bit out of focus. And the text: more Americans cast absentee ballots this year than ever before. We followed the process from start to finish. Certainly an interesting exercise in this year.
Let's put Rick on the spot. When you get to it, we'll have him you'll question him one of the ethics questions.
Sure.
You have Rick when you get to the ethics column. That'd be great.
But it looks like they did a really extensive piece on this in terms of voting by mail. An interesting shot of a printing press printing ballots, but the machinery of the people. Emily Bazelon again. A ballot is born, carrying the votes. The actual delivery process and the Postal Service obviously was the center of a lot of attention, a lot of criticism early on, and then also the day before for not delivering ballots, and then adding them up. Tallying so many absentee ballots was a painstaking effort.
Can I just say one thing about when you're talking about voting and the New York Times? I just want to give my hats off to what the amazing piece the Times did in reaching out to every state election bureau around the country to say,
absolutely,
like, there's no fraud in this election. I think that was an important public service to be thorough and to sort of go and be rigorous about and painstaking about, was there any fraud in this election? And the answer was a resounding no.
That was, I think, Friday or earlier in the week?
Earlier in the week. I can't remember.
Earlier in the week even, yeah. This is a great two-page spread for this story, just, a postmark, effectively. Democracy by Mail.
Magazine, NYTM right there. That's cute.
Right. I'd be curious at some of the markings, US P12. I'm sure that has some context. That's, if you can see it, it's in the postmark.
Unless it's page 12 of the Times Magazine.
There you go, page 12. Thank you, Sri. A nice red background for the article. This is the first piece by Emily. And so this continues. Go behind the cover, their AR work, which is always interesting. And then a little green for the printing process. So noting the...
and this reminds me, Rick, one of the things we were able to do is we got a tour of the New York Times read-along from the press one Wednesday night, where Mike Connors, the general manager of the printing press, showed us along, and we did a live Facebook Live from there, which was amazing and lots of fun.
I bet.
Just some great photography too.
Great photos. Wow.
And all this conversation about voting by mail, I just want to point out that I lived in Washington State for 15 years. They've been doing all mail elections for years without any difficulty at all. I think the biggest issue is, in terms of being realistic, for jurisdictions that were not used to voting by mail, they may not have had the infrastructure and the staff to deal with the volume. And that may have been a valid concern, but in general, voting by mail is not doesn't have to be an issue if you know how to do it. Just a comment there. And here's, you can see all the paper and the headline. If you have an error on a ballot, it's international news. Talk about pressure on the printing press. Imagine switching a D to an R if,
and I'm reminded also, Rick, of the butterfly ballots of.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, speaking of that, I have another little New York Times history thing that I thought the viewers here might get a kick out of. I was the lead writer of the Lead All, which was the main story on 2000 election story, and I witnessed then. I was writing the story, and you write different versions. Bush wins, Gore wins. We don't know who wins. And at one point, my bosses decided that Bush won and that we should print that story. And that was Joe Lelyveld, who was then the executive editor, put his head into the office where I was working and said, instead of saying stop the presses in a dramatic, movie-esque, cinematic way, he said, I think we have to stop the presses. So they stopped the presses, and the story I had written that said Bush wins was taken off the presses. And what was interesting is that we still thought there'd be a president selected that night or in the next morning. So I have the making somewhere in my storage of a New York Times extra that says Bush wins, that we were going to give out, sell or give out on the streets of New York whenever there was a winner that Wednesday morning. And it's probably worth a lot. It's such a vintage thing right now. Can you imagine a throwback like that? You would never think of printing an extra with the president, Biden wins and selling it on the streets of New York. But it wasn't that long ago. It was the year 2000 that we were readying and preparing an extra of the New York Times.
Yeah, wow, amazing. Naomi says, such an engaging, informative, and entertaining show. Happy anniversary. Happy 5th anniversary to STAT and to the New York Times Read Along. We're here every single Sunday, folks, at 8:30 a.m. Eastern, and you can find our archives at youtube.com/SPNet. Please join us. And a reminder that tonight is the 250th episode of my daily COVID-19 show, which is moving to a twice-a-week show. But tonight we have Dr. Peter Hotez, who is a great expert on the pandemic, and Sunny Slaughter, great expert on diversity and inclusion. They'll both be with us, as well as other guests, at 9 p.m. Eastern tonight. So, Rick, we've got a couple of questions that have come in. Neil, someone said there's also a very nice picture on page 34, 35 that you can show us, Neil.
I'll go back to it. Let's see what it is. Give me one moment.
Yeah. Meanwhile, let's just take a look at the comments, and some questions have come in for you, Rick, including, as you look back at your career, who is the interviewee whose story impacted you the most and how?
The person I interviewed that was sort of the most memorable moment, I think just because of who he was Richard Nixon. When Roger Stone, who was then an advisor to Richard Nixon, had a group of us younger reporters at the New York Times meeting Richard Nixon, because he wanted to sort of impress people who didn't cover Watergate. So it was a meeting at a hotel on DuPont Circle in Washington with myself, Maureen Dowd, I think Michael Kelly. There were just a few of us. And that was an amazingly memorable moment. I remember walking into his suite and shaking his hand, and he said, I saw your story on page, it was a story on B22 or whatever, but obviously his advisors had prepped him that I had a little story in the Times that day. But anyway, that moment stands out in terms of people I've met over the years. I've met a bunch of different presidents and people, but the most impactful interview that I did is probably when I interviewed President Clinton, who called me up on the phone to tell me that his vice president, Al Gore, wasn't a very good campaigner. And this was when Gore was running for president. And it caused there's a whole long backstory to that whole interview I had with Clinton. But in those days, for a president of the United States, I mean, way before Trump, for a president of the United States to call a reporter and to just tell him on the record about what was going on with the campaign and his own vice president was a huge political moment for the politics and for government, and really had an impact on how that whole campaign played out, and the relationship from that point on between a president of the United States and his vice president who is running himself. So that was probably the single most sort of impactful political interview that I did.
And here's the story. Clinton admits to concerns as Gore campaign stumbles. And Rick, you even had a video segment on MSNBC at that time.
I had it like that night, like literally like a half hour after I filed the story. And the funny coda to that story is a couple days later, I was interviewing Bob Dole, Senator Bob Dole. His wife Elizabeth was running for the Republican nomination, and she was number 2 in the polls behind George W. Bush. And she said, that interview you had with Clinton, what a idiot to say those things about Gore. He was going on and on about my Clinton interview. And I said, well, Senator, let's talk about your wife. How's she doing in her campaign? and he said, she's getting better. And it was the exact almost script that Clinton had told me about Gore. And I said, Mr. President, Senator Gore, Senator Dole, I heard she was giving money to McCain's campaign, or you were giving money to McCain's campaign. He said, yeah, I wanted to do that. So he, essentially the standard bearer of the Republican Party, was signaling to the Republican world that I don't really believe in my wife to be the Republican nominee. After that interview ran, she publicly had to say, I had to take my husband to the woodshed, and her finances dried up. And it's funny, at the end of that call, Dole said, don't be tough on me. He said, but that Clinton story, Leno and Letterman are going to have a field day. And little did he know that Leno and Letterman did have a field day for days after that, but on Clinton and on Dole. And it affected both those campaigns and sort of set the tone for what transpired in that political year. So that was just, and I do those stories were, obviously interesting to do, but they also, more than just being sort of like a little gotcha thing, they tell you something about the personalities of these candidates, their leadership styles, the fact that a senator, an important U.S. senator, didn't really believe his wife had what it took to be the Republican nominee. And that's important for readers to know.
Sure. A couple of quick things that you've triggered by that. Number one, I forgot that Libby Dole ran for president. I also remember that she was part of the team that pushed for seatbelt laws back in the early 80s in the Reagan administration that were met with the same bogus calls for freedom and skepticism and all of that vaccines and the masks are being related to right now. So that's something in common. The other is, when you look at this, you see as the print paper has gotten narrower, the website has become wider. So this is the old narrow New York Times because bandwidth and other issues. Design was much more narrow, and now of course it's almost double that. And then finally, one of the reasons why President Clinton, why there was never a President Gore, is because President Clinton was kind of boxed in by Gore. In the final weeks of the campaign, as you remember, they kept Clinton tied up and didn't let him go out and go around and do the kind of campaigning that might have helped Gore in the South and in other places. Right. That's one of the reasons. We know how narrow that margin was, and I'll always maintain, I don't know if you'll agree, that Clinton should have been unleashed a little more toward the end.
Well, I don't say this with pride, but there's a reality. If you can, the history books can trace back part of this whole divide in their fissure in their relationship to what Clinton said publicly to the New York Times about his vice president. That was really that was a turning point. And let me just say, if I can blow the horn of stat, when you mentioned the seatbelt thing, we had a piece last week quoting Ralph Nader, who was the big seatbelt belt guru, and comparing how that campaign to wear seatbelts was the sort of equivalent in those days of what would a mandatory mask requirement would be. And I was happy to see the Times did that piece later in the week.
Oh, that's great to hear that, and hear all the different newsletters that people can sign up for.
Those are all free newsletters. Morning Rounds is our flagship morning thing at 6:15 every morning. Daily recap you get around 4 or 5 o'clock at the end of the day, and then a more specialized readout is biotech, health tech, VC, Pharmalot, and our first opinion, China, et cetera, et cetera.
Great. Therese says, thanks, Rick, for sharing your incredible behind-the-scenes stories. What a career. And just to show you a range of people watching, Yomi from Sao Paulo, Susan from St. Paul, and
I know Susan, Sue Jasko, Sister Sue. Hi, Sue.
Nice. And Linda says, this is a Sunday morning ritual. Always look forward to this time. Thanks so much to all of you. And you can get your first 30 days of Stat Plus free via this link. So if you want to get Stat Plus, you can do that. Neil's got the behind the cover Democracy by Mail. Let's take a quick look at it. Maybe we won't run the full thing, but we'll just look at a little bit of it. We don't have the audio. All right, let's skip that, folks. You can find that video yourself, and you can watch it. Let's just see again. Eileen's watching from Philadelphia. Susan says hi, Rick, and Pradnya, God bless her, still tagging her friends.
Oh, I love her. I should put her on the payroll.
With all their titles, MD, DO, MPH, this is fantastic. Thank you so much for tagging your friends. Everybody do this. What an hour and a half plus we've had with Rick Berke of Stat News, and please follow him at Rick Berke, follow at Stat News, sign up for their newsletters. We're very grateful to everyone for joining us today, and to Rick for sharing his thoughts. We'll give you a chance to give us some final thoughts, Rick.
I just want to say, Sri, thank you and the team for indulging me in all my old New York Times stories and talking about Stat. As I said at the outset, two of the favorite things I love to talk about. And I want to say that thank God for the New York Times and what the Times does as a public service. I am proud to have devoted, nearly 3 decades of my life to being an editor and a reporter there, and I so believe in the mission of the Times. And I'm also grateful that I've had the opportunity to tell you about Stat, which I see in the tradition of the Times in terms of carrying out great journalism. My ambitions for Stat in terms of editing and pushing stories are no different than my ambitions for stories when I was an editor at the New York Times. We aim for high quality, high end, provocative journalism, and I hope that those of you who haven't read Stat will give us a chance, especially in these times when there's no more important issue right now than public health, and we are doing everything we can to cover this story and to offer stories that you can't get anywhere else. And that's sort of our goal every day. So it's been, I'm again grateful for the opportunity to talk about these things, and love seeing such a enthusiastic audience this early in the morning and from around the world. It's great to see.
Well, thank you, Rick. You were fantastic, and we learned so much, and we wish you the very best. We love seeing entrepreneurs taking their energy and what you learned at the Times and Politico, and then being able to pour it all into Stat. No bigger topic and no more important topic for our times than how we get through the science, getting science infused into all we do and trusting it as we go forward. So thank you very much, Rick. And I want to bring Neil on so that we can say goodbye to everybody and thank our teams as well. Thank you very much, Rick.
Stay safe, everyone.
Thank you, Rick.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Neil, well done. Another great show. You did a fabulous job with showing the paper. So let's thank our teams. And then we've got to go produce our other show that's coming up today. We have our episode of She's on Call with 2 great surgeons. That's coming up at 11 a.m. Eastern. So everyone, please tune in for that. Go to She's on Call and follow us there. And the 250th episode of my daily show at 9 p.m. Eastern time. So please join us for that.
Absolutely. And we certainly want to thank our team again. We couldn't do this show without Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor. Put that back on. Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, Julia Weeks, and Carla Baranauckas. You can follow Paula at Big Green Pen, Steve at Steve DeReeve, Julia Weeks at Julia L. Weeks, and Carla Baranauckas at Kabara. And thank you again, Carla, for arranging for Rick Berke to join us on today's show. What a fascinating discussion. And while we're talking about Carla, it would be good to also mention the newsletter. So let's go that. The Local Connection is a weekly newsletter that Carla puts out. You can subscribe at bit.ly/local news tips. Again, it's bit.ly/local news tips. And every issue does have a recap of the Sunday New York Times read along, which is really great. It also has pro tips for journalists, showing how you can localize the news. It's put out by the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University. So thank you again, Carla, for all your support of the New York Times read along. So Shri, if you have to go to produce the She's on Call, I have to say I'm always a stickler for the behind the cover. So if folks want to stay, we can definitely show the video because it's a fascinating look at the cover, and apologize for not having the audio earlier. But with that, we definitely want to thank everyone for joining us. Shri, any last thoughts?
Well, thank you, everybody. Great to have you all here. Neil's going to play that video for you. And please join us next Sunday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern. We'll have another terrific guest. And we're here every Sunday, so please join us. And tonight is the 250th episode of the daily COVID show, which is going to just turn into a show 2 or 3 times a week. We'll see how it all goes. Thanks very much, everybody. And Neil, over to you. Bye-bye. And big thanks to Carla, Paula, Steve, Julia, and to Neil for putting all of this together, and to Rick Berke. What a great guest. Tonight's guests are Peter Hotez, a pediatrician and expert on vaccines, and Sunny Slaughter, executive consultant and expert on diversity and inclusion. And you've seen Peter on television multiple times every week. Thanks very much, everybody. Bye-bye.
So we will end with showing the behind the cover. I know several people asked about it and are always interested. So let's go ahead and show that now.
From the New York Times Magazine, this is Behind the Cover.
This week, our issue is devoted to the election, an election unlike any other, principally because about 60 million people voted with absentee ballots. That's twice as many as have ever voted absentee in our history.
This was an incredibly ambitious project for our photo department. There was a lot of uncertainty in terms of what role the mail-in ballots would play in this year's election. So we wanted to really document the process in a completest way.
We began in September by sending Christopher Payne to document the beginning, the printing of the absentee ballots.
We loved his photos because they showed the beauty in the industrial process of printing.
The next part of the process that we wanted to document was the post office, obviously the heart and soul of an absentee balloting election. And so we sent Philip Montgomery to Florida to take pictures of these remarkable individuals who had this enormous responsibility.
We sent Dina Letofsky to document the last part of the process, which was the counting of the ballots in Florida, Arizona, and Pennsylvania. The color and the lighting really adds drama to them. She just did a fantastic job of framing these images.
And then we put those 3 chapters together to tell the story of what we're calling democracy by mail.
As the photographs were coming in throughout the month, we were putting different images in the cover templates.
And one of those pictures from Philip was what we decided we would use on the cover.
It's an image of an election inspector in Lansing, Michigan, counting an absentee ballot on election night. Even though it has a classic feel, the poll worker was wearing a mask and gloves, it's very particular to this moment.
Really, it's something to be deeply proud of as an American. In the middle of a deadly pandemic, without enough funding, and with pretty relentless attempts to undermine the legitimacy of the process, we somehow managed to carry off something we've never done before.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for staying just a little bit longer. Some really great comments came in. I just want to thank folks. Ellen, great program. Thanks, Shri and Rick. Jonathan Borstein, great show. The newsletter sounds fantastic. That's one of the stat newsletters. Linda Lawrence, another great show. Thank you, Linda, for watching. And who else? Pradnya, that was an awesome show. Patricia saying, looking forward to seeing behind the scenes, obviously before I put it up. So thank you, Patricia. And Ellen saying thanks as well. So again, thank you for joining us for Shri's Sunday New York Times read along. If you're joining us late, you can watch it right here on these same channels on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and on YouTube. We've also been live on Stat's Facebook and Twitter accounts. Our guest today was Rick Berke, the executive editor of Stat News, former editor and reporter at the New York Times, and executive editor at Politico. And today I want to wish everyone a happy Diwali. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your Sunday mornings. Take care and have a good week.